I never expected my mother-in-law's desperate phone call to be the start of my own personal hell. But looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs. My name is Lila, and until that rainy Tuesday evening, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. I was stirring a pot of homemade marinara sauce, my grandmother's recipe, when my phone lit up with Marjorie's number. Usually I'd let it go to voicemail, but something about getting 3 calls in 5 minutes made me pause. "Lila, dear," she said, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "We need your help. We've lost everything." I turned down the heat under the sauce and gripped the counter. "What do you mean, everything?" "The house, our savings." She broke into sobs. "We have nowhere else to go." My stomach dropped. I'd always kept Marjorie at arm's length, her passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my parenting. Even the way I folded towels had taught me that much. But hearing her cry, that was new. "Where's Walter?" I asked, meaning my father-in-law. He's not handling this well." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Please don't tell Ethan yet. I needed to ask you first. You're the practical one." That should have been my first red flag. Marjorie had never complimented me before, not even backhanded. But I was too shocked to notice. "How long have you known about this?" I asked. "It all happened so fast," she said, but something in her tone felt rehearsed. "We need somewhere to stay, just until we get back on our feet. You have that lovely guest room." I closed my eyes, already seeing my peaceful home life crumbling. "I need to talk to Ethan." "No." The sharpness in her voice made me flinch. Please, let me tell him. I'm his mother. I needed to know if you'd be willing to help first." The sauce started bubbling over, and I rushed to turn off the stove. As I moved the pot, my wedding photo caught my eye, Ethan and me, young and happy, with his parents beaming beside us. Marjorie looked so different then, before she'd started viewing me as competition for her son's attention. "How long?" I asked. "A month, maybe 2. She sniffled. "We don't want to be a burden." I almost laughed at that. In 20 years of knowing her, Marjorie had perfected the art of being a burden while making it seem like she was doing you a favor. "I'll talk to Ethan tonight," I said firmly. "He needs to know." "Of course, dear. You're right." Her voice had already steadied, the tears gone. "We'll bring just the essentials. And Lila, thank you. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but family is family." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, the burnt smell of marinara filling the air. My phone buzzed with a text from my son Zach at college. "Mom, everything okay? Grandma just called me crying about moving in with you guys." I stared at the message, my hand starting to shake. She'd called Zach before even giving me time to talk to Ethan? I checked the timestamp on her call, 7 minutes ago. The front door opened, and I heard Ethan's keys hit the bowl in the hallway. "Something's burning," he called out. "You okay in there?" I looked at my phone again, then at our wedding photo, then at the ruined sauce. Marjorie had already started her game, and I had a sinking feeling I'd just been outmaneuvered. But 2 could play at this game, and she was about to learn that this daughter-in-law had learned a few tricks of her own over the years. "Honey," I called back, my voice steady. "We need to talk." The moving truck arrived 3 days later, and it wasn't the small U-Haul Marjorie had promised. It was a full-sized professional moving van, packed to the brim with what looked like their entire house. I stood in our driveway, watching the movers unload box after box, while Marjorie directed traffic like a symphony conductor. "Those go in the guest room," she called out, pointing to a set of antique furniture that would never fit in our modest spare bedroom. "And be careful with that armoire. It's been in the family for generations." Ethan appeared beside me, his face tight with concern. "Mom, I thought you said you were only bringing the essentials?" "Oh, darling." Marjorie's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "These are the essentials. We couldn't just leave behind your great-grandmother's china cabinet, could we?" I watched as the movers struggled to angle the massive cabinet through our front door. The walls already bore fresh scratches from their previous attempts with other pieces. "Where exactly do you expect all this to go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "We'll make it work," Marjorie said, patting my arm. "Though if you moved that horrible old couch of yours to the basement." "We're not moving our couch," I cut in. "This is temporary, remember?" Walter emerged from his car then, looking smaller somehow in his rumpled suit. He hadn't said more than 2 words since arriving, but his eyes kept darting around like he was searching for escape routes. "Walter," I tried, "maybe we should discuss." "I need to make some calls," he muttered, disappearing into the house. By dinner time, our guest room had transformed into what looked like an antique store explosion. Boxes filled the hallway, And somehow Marjorie had already rearranged our living room to make space, though all she'd really done was push our furniture against the walls to make room for her pieces. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when Marjorie drifted into the kitchen, carrying a crystal vase. "Lila, dear, where do you keep your fresh flowers?" "I don't usually buy fresh flowers," I said, focusing on the carrots under my knife. "Oh," she set the vase down with a pointed sigh. "Well, I suppose we'll have to make do. Though a home without fresh flowers is so austere, don't you think?" The knife came down harder than necessary. "The grocery money needs to go to actual groceries right now." Of course. She opened our pantry, tootaying softly. "Speaking of which, you're running low on quite a few things." I took the liberty of making a list. Nothing fancy, just some necessities. Organic produce, that special mineral water Walter needs for his digestion, a few specialty items. I set the knife down before I could throw it. "Marjorie, we need to talk about expenses. With 4 adults in the house." "Oh, don't worry about that," she waved dismissively. "We'll contribute once we're settled. Though really, considering we're family, I would hope you wouldn't nickel and dime us during our time of need." My phone buzzed, a text from Zach. "Mom, Grandma just called asking for my login for the streaming services. Says you're being difficult about the TV situation. What's going on?" Another buzz. "Also, she mentioned something about redecorating my old room for their permanent guest suite. Should I be worried?" I looked up to find Marjorie watching me with that same calculating smile she'd worn at my wedding, right before she'd announced to everyone that my dress would have looked better on her cousin's daughter. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked sweetly. From the living room came the sound of something heavy scraping across hardwood, followed by Ethan's startled protest and Walter's first full sentence of the day. "The feng shui in here is all wrong." I gripped my phone tighter, thinking of the credit card bill that would arrive next month, the grocery list that would drain our savings, and the temporary situation that was already growing roots through the foundation of my home. "Everything's fine," I said, reaching for my grandmother's number in my contacts. "Just perfect," because Marjorie wasn't the only one who could make calls for reinforcements. And my grandmother Beatrice had taught me everything I knew about handling difficult people, including a few lessons Marjorie was about to learn the hard way. The credit card statement arrived exactly 2 weeks after Marjorie and Walter moved in. I nearly dropped my morning coffee when I opened it. The balance was 3 times our usual amount. My hands shook as I scrolled through the charges. Spa treatments, designer boutiques, gourmet food delivery services I'd never even heard of. But it was the last charge that made my blood run cold. A $5,000 deposit to Golden Years Luxury Living, dated the day before Marjorie's tearful phone call about losing everything. I was still staring at the statement when Marjorie floated into the kitchen, wearing a new silk robe I'd never seen before. "Oh good, you're up. I hope you don't mind, but I ordered breakfast from that lovely French cafe downtown. The groceries you buy are a bit basic for Walter's palate." The cafe receipt was right there on the statement. $127 for breakfast pastries. "Marjorie," I said carefully, "why is my credit card linked to your phone?" She blinked innocently. "Oh that? Well, when you let me borrow it for groceries last week, I saved the information. For emergencies, you understand. It seemed practical, given our living situation. And the deposit to Golden Years Living? Something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or calculation. But it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. "Research, dear. We have to consider all our options. Research doesn't require a deposit." The doorbell rang and Marjorie brightened. "That'll be breakfast. We should hurry before it gets cold." "I'm not paying for." But she'd already swept past me to answer the door. I heard her cheerfully directing the delivery person to our kitchen, chattering about how grateful she was that some establishments still understood quality service. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Meeting running late. Won't be home until 8. Everything okay there?" Before I could respond, another charge notification popped up. $89 at Le Petit Jardin. "Your credit card was declined," Marjorie called from the front door, her voice tight with embarrassment. How mortifying. I had to use the other one. "What other one?" She appeared in the doorway, holding a familiar-looking blue card, my emergency backup credit card, the one I kept hidden in my desk drawer. "Marjorie," I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the roaring in my ears. "Why were you in my desk?" "Looking for stamps, of course. Though really, dear, you should organize your papers better. It took ages to find anything in that mess." I thought of my grandmother's voice. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people reveal themselves. But as I watched Marjorie unpack gold-trimmed pastry boxes, arranging them just so on my kitchen counter, I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival. "We need to talk," I said. "About boundaries, about expenses, about—" "Oh," Marjorie interrupted, pulling out her phone. "That reminds me. I've been meaning to discuss the holiday plans. I took the liberty of booking us all on a lovely cruise. You, me, Ethan, Walter, and Zach too, of course. First-class cabins. It'll be just what this family needs to bond properly." My credit card notification pinged again. $12,000 to Royal Caribbean Cruises. "I'm calling Ethan," I said, reaching for my phone. "He's in meetings," Marjorie said smoothly. "And really, Lila, do you want to bother him with petty financial squabbles when he's so stressed at work? Besides, I've already told him about the cruise." He seemed concerned at first, but I reminded him how important family time is. I looked at this woman, this stranger wearing expensive silk in my kitchen, spending my money, invading my home, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power, about control, about the slow erosion of everything I'd built. "You're right," I said, picking up my phone. "I won't call Ethan." Marjorie's smile was triumphant. "I'm calling my grandmother instead." The smile froze, then cracked just slightly at the edges. Because Marjorie had met Beatrice exactly once at my wedding, and even she knew this wasn't going to end well for her. The first thing my grandmother said when I called was, "You've let this go on too long." Her voice carried the weight of decades of handling difficult people, and I could picture her stern expression even through the phone. "I know," I admitted, pacing our back patio where Marjorie couldn't overhear. "But it's complicated. Ethan is being manipulated just as much as you are," Beatrice cut in. "Tell me about the money." Before I could respond, the sliding glass door opened. Ethan stepped out, his face drawn. "Lila, we need to talk about the cruise." "I'll call you back," I told Beatrice, but she spoke quickly. "Don't let them divide you too. That's their game." I ended the call as Ethan sat heavily on our patio furniture, the set Marjorie had deemed tragically suburban last week. "Mom says you're being unreasonable about the vacation," he started. "Unreasonable?" I pulled out my phone, pulling up our banking app. "Look at this, Ethan. Really look." His eyes widened as he scrolled through the charges. "This can't be right. Mom said she was just getting necessities. The cruise deposit alone was $12,000. Money we don't have." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so defeated it made my chest ache. "I'll talk to her. Make her understand." The sliding door opened again. Walter stepped out this time, something I hadn't seen him do in the 3 weeks they'd been here. He looked older in the morning light, more fragile. "Son," he said quietly, "your mother's crying in the kitchen." Ethan stood immediately, but I grabbed his arm. "She's crying because I called her out on stealing our credit cards." Walter's face twitched. "You don't understand. She's trying to maintain our standard of living, our dignity, by destroying our savings." "We'll pay you back," Walter said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Once my investments." "What investments?" I asked sharply, because I saw the deposit to Golden Years Living. "Are you even really broke?" A heavy silence fell. Inside, I could hear Marjorie's theatrical sobs growing louder, clearly meant to carry through the door. "It's complicated," Walter finally said. "Then uncomplicate it." I snapped, but Ethan was already heading inside to comfort his mother. My phone buzzed, a text from Zach. "Mom, Grandma Marjorie just called. Says you're trying to kick them out? Says Dad might lose his job over stress." Another buzz. "Also, she mentioned she's planning my wedding? To her friend's daughter? Who I've never met." I looked up to find Walter still standing there, shifting uncomfortably. "You should be grateful," he said suddenly, his voice hard. "We gave Ethan everything, paid for his education, his first car, his... And now you're taking everything from him." I cut in. "His savings, his peace of mind, his... We're his parents. And I'm his wife. The person who has to watch him crumble under the weight of your manipulation." Walter stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You don't want to make an enemy of us, Lila. Marjorie has ways of making things difficult." It wasn't a threat so much as a warning, and somehow that made it worse. Because he was right, Marjorie had already started her campaign, calling Ethan's boss about family concerns, spreading rumors among our friends about my unstable behavior, positioning herself as the victim of my cruelty. My phone buzzed again. "Beatrice." Packed my bags. "I'll be there tomorrow. Time to show these amateurs how it's really done." Through the glass doors, I could see Marjorie holding court in my kitchen, tears artfully dabbed away as she patted Ethan's hand. She caught my eye and smiled, not her usual saccharine smile, but something sharper, more triumphant. She thought she'd won. Thought she'd successfully driven a wedge between me and Ethan, established her dominance over my household, secured her position as the puppet master of our family drama. But she'd forgotten something crucial. I'd learned manipulation from a master. And tomorrow, she'd meet her match in Beatrice Collins. I smiled back at Marjorie through the glass, and for the first time since this started, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Beatrice arrived like a storm front, her small frame carrying the authority of a general entering battle. She didn't ring the doorbell. She had her own key, a detail I'd forgotten to mention to Marjorie. "Grandmother." Marjorie's voice hit a pitch I didn't think possible. "What a surprise." Beatrice swept past her, taking in the transformed living room with one sharp glance. "I see you've made yourself comfortable in my granddaughter's home." I watched from the kitchen doorway as Marjorie's face cycled through several expressions before settling on concerned sympathy. "Oh, you don't know? We've had such terrible misfortune." "Save the performance," Beatrice cut in, setting her bag down next to Marjorie's prized antique settee. "I'm not here for theater." Walter emerged from his makeshift office, formerly our dining room, his face paling slightly at the sight of my grandmother. They'd met at my wedding, where Beatrice had quietly but firmly shut down his attempt to give an impromptu speech about Ethan's questionable career choices. "Beatrice," he managed, "what brings you?" "The cruise booking," Beatrice said pleasantly, pulling out her iPad. "Fascinating choice of cabin upgrades. Premium suites aren't cheap these days, are they?" Marjorie's hand fluttered to her throat. "Well, family vacations are important for bonding. So is financial stability," Beatrice replied, tapping her screen. "Speaking of which, I've been looking into Golden Years Living. Lovely place." Their financial advisor was quite helpful in explaining their deposit policies. The color drained from Walter's face. Marjorie's smile became fixed plastic. "I don't know what you're implying," Marjorie started, but Beatrice held up one hand. "Before you continue that sentence, dear, you should know that I had a fascinating conversation with your bank's fraud department this morning." My phone buzzed, Ethan texting from work. "Mom keeps calling about Grandma Beatrice. Says she's making threats? What's happening?" Before I could respond, Beatrice was moving again, this time toward the kitchen. "Lila, dear, let's make some tea. The good kind, not that supermarket blend Marjorie's been complaining about." In the kitchen, Beatrice pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed in her bag. "Your credit card company has flagged suspicious activity. They're launching an investigation. But that means, she said quietly, that Marjorie's house of cards is about to collapse. The question is, are you ready for what comes next?" A crash from the living room interrupted us. We rushed out to find Walter on the floor, Marjorie kneeling beside him. "His heart," she wailed. "The stress is too much. We need to call an ambulance." But Walter was already getting up, his face flushed with something that looked more like shame than illness. "I'm fine," he muttered. "Just lost my balance." "A convenient time for a spell," Beatrice observed dryly. Marjorie's head snapped up, tears forgotten. "How dare you? After everything we've done for this family." "Everything you've done?" I found myself saying, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "You mean like maxing out our credit cards? Trying to manipulate Ethan's career? Planning my son's wedding to a stranger? I was helping." Marjorie shot back. "You never understood what it takes to maintain a certain standard." "Enough." Beatrice's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Walter, sit down. Marjorie, be quiet. Lila, call Ethan. It's time everyone learned exactly what's been happening with the family finances." My phone buzzed again, another text from Ethan. "Dad just called. Says they're being forced out. Says you and Grandma Beatrice are threatening legal action." I looked at Marjorie, saw the desperate calculation in her eyes, and realized this was just the beginning. Because people like her don't go down without taking others with them. "Make the call," Beatrice said softly. "It's time to lance this wound." And as I dialed Ethan's number, I watched Marjorie pull out her own phone, her fingers flying over the keys, and knew that whatever truth we were about to uncover, she was already spinning her own version of it. The question was, who would Ethan believe? Ethan arrived home early, his tie loose and his face drawn. The living room had become a war room, with Beatrice at one end surrounded by papers and Marjorie at the other, still furiously typing on her phone. "Everyone needs to stop," he said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Mom, the emails to my boss have to stop. Dad, whatever's really going on, we need to know now." Walter stood by the window, shoulders hunched. Son, we were trying to protect you. By stealing from us? I cut in, but Beatrice raised her hand. Walter, she said quietly, show him the letters. The room went still. Marjorie's phone slipped from her fingers. What letters? Ethan asked. Walter pulled an envelope from his jacket. Not the crisp suit jacket he'd been wearing when they arrived, but an old one I recognized from years ago. His hands shook as he handed it to Ethan. Collection notices, Walter said. From the casino. From private lenders. From. Enough. Marjorie stood suddenly. We don't need to air our dirty laundry just because your wife's grandmother is trying to drive us out. $40,000, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. That's how much you've spent on our cards in 3 weeks. Money we don't have. Money we can't. We're your parents. Marjorie's voice cracked. Everything we did was for family. And now you're letting her destroy us. You're destroying us, Ethan said, reading through the letters. These dates. Dad, this goes back years. The business didn't fail, did it? You gambled it away. Walter's silence was answer enough. And you knew. Ethan turned to his mother. You covered it up? I protected our family. Marjorie's makeup was running now, real tears this time. I did what I had to do. And when things got bad, I knew you would help us. You're our son. I'm also Lila's husband, Ethan said. And Zach's father. Zach understands family loyalty better than she does. Marjorie pointed at me. He already agreed to meet Caroline's daughter. You told our son he had to marry a stranger to save your reputation? My voice didn't sound like my own anymore. I told him about an opportunity, a merger of families that could. Stop. Beatrice's voice cut through the chaos. Walter, show them the rest. Walter pulled out more papers, bank statements, loan documents, a second mortgage we knew nothing about. They're in your name, Beatrice said to Ethan. Taken out with an old power of attorney from when you were in college. Still active, apparently. The room spun. I grabbed the back of a chair as Ethan flipped through the documents, his face growing paler. How much? He whispered. With the credit cards, the loans, the mortgage. Beatrice consulted her notes. Just over $200,000. My legs gave out. I sank into the chair as Marjorie started crying again, loud theatrical sobs that couldn't drown out the ringing in my ears. We'll lose everything, I heard myself say. The house, Zach's college fund. You'll survive, Marjorie snapped. You always do, don't you? Perfect Lila, with her perfect little life. Get out. The words came from Ethan, soft but final. Son, get out. But as Walter moved toward the door, Marjorie played her final card. She pulled out her phone, showing us the screen. I've already called Adult Protective Services, she said. I'm reporting elder abuse. Beatrice is clearly manipulating this situation, and in her condition. What condition? I asked. Marjorie's smile was terrible. The dementia she's been hiding. Why else would she make up these horrible accusations about her own family? Beatrice stood slowly, her face unreadable. You really want to play this game, Marjorie? I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family, Marjorie said. Even from themselves. And in that moment, watching my mother-in-law prepare to destroy all our lives to maintain her control, I realized that sometimes the worst revenge isn't something you do to others. It's what they do to themselves. The question was, how many of us would she take down with her? The Adult Protective Services worker arrived the next morning, a tired-looking woman named Janet, who'd clearly been dragged into a family drama she didn't want to handle. Marjorie hovered nearby, alternating between concerned daughter-in-law and righteous whistleblower. Mrs. Collins, Janet began, but Beatrice held up a hand. Before we start, I'd like to show you something. She pulled out her iPad, bringing up a video. This is from yesterday. I record all my important conversations these days. For posterity, you understand. The color drained from Marjorie's face. The video played, showing Marjorie in our kitchen yesterday morning, before Beatrice arrived. If they try to force us out, she was saying to Walter, we'll use the dementia angle. No one questions elder abuse claims these days. It'll buy us time. Janet's expression shifted from tired to sharp. Mrs. Harlow making false reports is a serious offense. That video could be doctored, Marjorie said quickly. She's trying to. I've also brought my latest medical records, Beatrice continued, pulling out a folder. And statements from my doctor, lawyer, and financial advisor, all dated this week. I find it helps to be prepared when dealing with family matters. The front door opened and Zach walked in. My heart stopped. He was supposed to be at college. Mom, he said, ignoring everyone else. I found something you need to see. He pulled out his phone, showing me emails between Marjorie and someone named Caroline. They detailed an elaborate plan. An arranged marriage between Zach and Caroline's daughter would save both families' reputations. In exchange for the match, Caroline's family would cover Walter's gambling debts. You were selling my son? My voice came out as a whisper. I was securing his future. Marjorie's composure finally cracked. Everything I did was for this family. The money, the arrangements, it was all to maintain our position. Our dignity. Your dignity? Walter's voice made us all turn. He stood in the doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Tell them the rest, Marjorie. Tell them why we really lost everything. Walter, don't. The gambling wasn't just me, he said quietly. Show them your casino records, Marjorie. Show them who really lost our retirement fund. The silence that followed was deafening. Janet quietly closed her notebook. I think I've seen enough, she said. Mrs. Harlow, making false reports is a criminal offense. And given the financial fraud allegations, you can't prove anything, Marjorie said, but her voice shook. I was protecting us. From what? Ethan asked. The truth? That both of you gambled away everything? That you tried to sell my son's future to cover it up? We're your parents. No, Ethan said, his voice breaking. Right now you're just two people who need help. Real help, not more lies. Beatrice stood slowly. I've made some calls. There's a place, they handle addiction recovery, financial counseling, couples therapy. They have an opening for both of you. You want to send us to rehab? Marjorie laughed, but it sounded hollow. Like common addicts? Mom, Ethan said softly. Please, before you lose everything that actually matters. Walter moved first, taking the brochure from Beatrice. How soon can we start? Walter. Marjorie's voice rose. You can't seriously. I'm tired, he said simply. Aren't you tired? Something in Marjorie's face crumpled. For the first time since I'd known her, the mask completely fell away. She looked lost, scared, old. What about our things? She asked in a small voice. They'll be here, I heard myself say. In storage. When you're ready. Marjorie looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in 20 years. I never meant. She started, then stopped. I didn't know how to be anything else. I know, I said. Because sometimes the worst revenge isn't making someone pay for what they've done. It's making them face who they've become. Janet quietly excused herself as Walter and Marjorie went upstairs to pack. Beatrice squeezed my hand, and Zach hugged his father. And in the wreckage of our family's foundations, I saw something unexpected beginning to emerge. The possibility of something real, something honest, being built from the ashes of all these carefully constructed lies. 6 months later, I stood in front of Golden Years Living, holding a box of Marjorie's antique photo albums. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, reminding me of that first desperate phone call that had started everything. You don't have to do this, Ethan said beside me. We'd been slowly sorting through his parents' belongings, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to return. I know, I said, shifting the box. But some things shouldn't stay buried. We found Marjorie in the facility's garden, looking smaller without her designer clothes and carefully maintained armor. 3 months into treatment, she'd finally started writing letters, real ones, not manipulative manifestos. The last one had simply said, I'm sorry. She looked up as we approached, her eyes fixing on the box. My albums, she whispered. I assumed you'd thrown them away. Family history matters, I said, setting the box down. Even the complicated parts. Walter joined us, looking healthier than he had in years. The gambling addiction program had stripped away his false pride, leaving something more genuine in its place. We've been doing family therapy, he said, glancing at Ethan. Learning about patterns, how they repeat unless you break them. Like mother, like daughter-in-law? Marjorie's voice was quiet, but there was something new in it, self-awareness maybe. I saw myself in you, Lila. The way you protected your family, stood your ground. I never learned how to do it without destroying everything around me. Mom, Ethan started, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. I've been working with my therapist on honesty. Real honesty, not the kind I used as a weapon. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. This is for you, Lila. Inside was a check. Not for the full amount they'd taken, but significant nonetheless. I sold my jewelry collection, Marjorie explained. It's a start. A start, I echoed, thinking of Beatrice's words about karma and cycles. There's something else, Walter added. We've been talking to the prosecutor. About the fraud, the false reports. We're going to take responsibility. Properly this time. My phone buzzed, a text from Zach. How's it going? Need backup? I smiled, typing back. We're okay. Real okay, not Grandma Marjorie okay. I don't expect forgiveness, Marjorie said, touching one of her photo albums. But I hope we can build something new. Something true. Truth is a good foundation, I said, remembering how close we'd come to losing everything. Not just money, but trust, family, hope. As we left that afternoon, Marjorie called out one last time. Lila, thank you. Not for the albums, but for. She gestured vaguely at the facility, at herself, at everything that had changed. For showing me a different way to be strong. In the car, Ethan took my hand. You okay? I thought about revenge, about justice, about the fine line between protecting what's yours and becoming what you fear. I'm learning, I said. We all are. That evening, Beatrice came for dinner, a regular occurrence now. As we set the table, she watched me with knowing eyes. You didn't destroy her, she observed. Even when you could have. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people face themselves, I said, repeating her words from months ago. She smiled, arranging the napkins just so, a habit I'd inherited from her, not from Marjorie. And sometimes family is what you build from the ashes of what burns down. Later, I found an old photo that had slipped from one of Marjorie's albums. Her and Walter on their wedding day, young and hopeful, before status and appearances had corrupted their love. I pinned it to our fridge, next to Zach's college schedule, and our new family budget plan. Because sometimes the hardest truth to learn is that healing doesn't mean forgetting, and moving forward doesn't mean leaving everything behind. Sometimes it means building something new while keeping just enough of the past to remember why change was necessary in the first place. And maybe that's the greatest revenge of all, not destroying what hurt you, but transforming it into something that helps you grow.